Hello, everyone. I am here with Lyndsey McNally, director at Condo Lending Group. Lyndsey is the person you go to when your building is having a terrible financial disaster and you need money really fast and you don't want to special assess. Lyndsey was also the former president of CCI Toronto, writer of articles, all around great person, and happy to have her as our guest for today. And today's topic is going to be, as you can guess, financial nightmares. What buildings do to get themselves into big financial problems, and what kind of things can happen to buildings that are out of their control. So, Lyndsey, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone.
Hi, and what is that I hear in the background?
Is that my dog snoring? I hope
Is that your
hopefully
dog
it'll be more
snoring?
entertaining than Bruno over there sleeping in the background.
Okay, so if you all hear dogs snoring or a weird sound, that's what that is. It's not me, I promise. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. So, as some of you listening know, condos can go through periods of problems, financial problems. That's what we're going to discuss today. So, Lyndsey, what are you see a ton of these every day you live this. What are the most common problems you see in condos that have gotten to the point where they may need a loan?
Well, I mean, I would say as a starting point, a lot of condominium corporations do find themselves in financial trouble, despite making their best efforts to do the right thing. Of course, you do find condominium corporations that have mismanagement and they've gotten themselves in a pickle because of it. But that's, in my experience, the exception, not the rule. I, of course, have some horror stories where things have gone terribly wrong because of poor decisions or poor management. But we do have some fundamental issues in reserve fund planning and the way that capital projects are executed for condominium corporations that really contribute to these nightmares.
So let's get back to the fundamental problems. What are just some of the disasters you've seen? You mentioned mismanagement. It's not the most common, but what kind of things have you seen, and what can condos do to kind of steer clear of that?
Well, I mean, one thing that happens really, really routinely is that condominium corporations and their boards are not prepared really to face some of these major capital repair projects, both from a financial point of view, but also from a construction execution point of view. I mean, obviously, these projects can be really disruptive to the individual unit owners. And if you don't have the money, it's really, really hard to advance to the point where you're ready to actually do the work. But
I can
what,
tell you, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, what can end up happening is if, you think of a building as being like a living, breathing thing, right? And as it ages, it needs different repairs at different periods of its life cycle. When you get into the habit of pushing projects for whatever reason, you run into this challenge where one, the project becomes ultimately more expensive because inflation can really hurt us. And two, the building reaches a point where it has so many things that need to be done at the same time that you can't reasonably execute the projects or afford them.
Yeah, I can say from a financial side, it's difficult, but politically, 100%. And I've seen that myself where I've taken over buildings where there is a mountain of work to be done. And we ask, well, what happened before this? Like, why haven't you done the windows? Why haven't you done the structural repairs to the parking garage that, almost make it look like it's going to collapse? And a lot of the answer I get is, well, the last board didn't want to do it, or they wanted to do it in a new board requisition a meeting because they didn't want to do it special assessment. The manager got fired, or the manager had 8 different managers of the same company. And it's just kicking the can down the road over and over again until it piles up to the point where you're in a real mess and special assessments are no longer an option. You need to go bigger than that. And that's ones we've seen. You mentioned also some fundamental structural problems. And what did you mean by that?
So, you have to look back to the history of the legislation in Ontario for condominium corporations. The current way that we plan reserve fund studies goes back to 2001. Okay. In 2017, they amended the Condominium Act, but the sections which changed the way reserve fund planning happens, they actually haven't been enacted into law. So we've known for a long time, like at least since 2017, that just the way that we're planning reserve fund studies, it's a little bit insufficient. And so you can follow the letter of the law and actually increase your contributions based on the way we're meant to plan these reserve fund studies and still find that you don't have the money at the end of the day.
So politics aside, because again, a bad board management combination, you're just gonna delay. You're not gonna get things done. But what kind of legal changes would you want to see? What do you think would help?
Um, well, personally, I'm not a reserve fund planner, but I do hang out with really cool, awesome, smart reserve fund planners all the time. And at CCI Toronto and at ACMO as well, we've done a lot of work in, educating government bodies about some of the challenges. And so I can draw from the work that's been done by all these professionals in the industry to tell you sort of what the issues are. First of all, the first year contributions for a condominium corporation, right? Brand new condominium corporation is built. In the first year budget, the requirement for the reserve fund contribution is only 10% of the operating budget.
Yeah, and
And
that's
that's really based on
drastically
nothing.
low. Yeah.
Yeah, it's based on nonsense. It's
It's based on wanting to
definitely not
sell,
enough.
it's based on wanting to sell units at a cheaper price.
Exactly. So in year one for the condominium corporation, already you're starting to fall behind. You're not saving enough towards your capital repairs. In the first year, you actually do complete a reserve fund study. That's mandatory. And boards of directors will find themselves struggling to implement the increases required to properly fund the reserve fund at that point in time. How do you go to your owners and say, oh, condo fees need to increase $100, $200, $300 for projects that aren't going to happen for 20 years, right? This creates political divides. Boards are hesitant to actually make those increases. So what do? We spread the increases out over several years. Okay.
Yeah.
3 years is the generally accepted amount of time that you can kind of top up your reserve fund before you're trying to get to inflation matched increases.
Yeah,
But
but as you mentioned, you're looking then at, sometimes 30, 40% on a new building where you're right, you have a whole bunch of projects that in 10 years, 15 years are going to be coming up all at once. All your things are aging. So the sense of urgency isn't there. Why, as a resident, I bought a unit with low condo fees. Why am I going to agree to increase them $250 over the next 3 years when I'm probably not going to be living in the building, to be honest, when that money gets used. So you're right. There's a fundamental problem there about just how we start.
yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. And that 3 year period of time where we're trying to top up the reserve fund, it's actually not law. It's a rule of thumb. The professional engineers do use it in their guidelines for reserve fund planning, but it's really tempting for a board of directors to try to push those increases over a longer period of time. So your reserve fund is always in this pattern of being deficient, and every 3 years you update your reserve fund study, you adjust for inflation, and it just keeps getting
And
worse and worse
you
and
find that
worse
you're
over
deficient,
time.
but 3 years in the future.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump, but why don't we just take a break from that? What is the worst disaster you've seen? Give me the story. Like what have you seen out in the field in terms
Yeah.
of financial problems?
Yeah, well, I see a lot of them. I spend almost every night working with condominium communities, meeting with owners, talking about their financial challenges. The very worst one I've ever personally seen, though, actually comes from before my current career. So before I did what I do now, I was a condo manager for almost 20 years.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
I made it out on the other side, mostly whole. I may or may not drink too much now, but that's okay.
That's part of the package. Yeah,
Yeah, it's part of the
the
package.
PTSD is part of it. It's okay.
Yeah, it taught me how to drink whiskey straight. It's okay.
Yep.
But I'm going to draw my experience as a condo manager to talk about this very worst disaster. So we took over a 7-year-old condominium corporation, and you think, what can really go wrong in 7 years? Like that's not a long period of time. So this condo corporation was a really interesting one. It was a conversion. So it used to be an old hotel, and it was converted to a condominium corporation. The developer didn't really address a lot of maintenance and repair issues when they were doing the conversion. So these owners all came into a building that was already in a pretty bad state of repair. And he didn't actually turn over control of the building to the owners through the turnover process under the act. So he kind of just kept the declarant board, representatives of his firm at the helm of this condominium corporation. And he was a bad guy. And he purposefully was putting this condominium corporation at financial risk. He ran an unbalanced budget. He didn't contribute to the reserve fund. And he really was just in this pattern of hiring contractors and then not paying them. And when they decided they didn't want to work at the corporation anymore because they weren't getting paid, he would just hire different contractors. So the
Ouch. Yeah.
corporation was building up all of this debt. When we took on the corporation, in addition to a bunch of complex legal issues, which we won't get into today because that's not what we're here to talk about in this podcast, the condo corporation was almost $1 million in deficit in their operating budget, and they had about $50,000 in their reserve fund. Really, really, really bad situation for the owners of that condominium corporation. So what do? Right? The owners here, they did band together. They got a group together, they hired a lawyer, and they went to court to try to get a court-appointed administrator. And for those listening who don't know what that is, obviously it's a really serious step. But what happens is the owners go to court and they say, look, we are not, as a population, able to manage the problems in our condominium corporation. Things have gotten too bad. We need one professional to step in and act as the board of directors to dig us out of the hole that we're in. Now, the interesting thing that happened here is despite how bad things were, the court said, no, we're not going to give you a court-appointed administrator. So that gives you an indication of sort of what the threshold is, what the test is for the courts to say, an administrator is required. That's how.
So go and solve this problem on your own with the knowledge you have of condo law. Go ahead and solve this problem. Good luck.
Exactly. So this group of owners was organized enough and smart enough that, maybe they could take the steps that they needed to do. They could untangle the mess and figure things out. But it's very, very difficult to do that when you have to face your neighbors in the elevator, when you're an owner too, and you have to.
And you're also doing it free of charge as a volunteer, right? Like you're not getting paid. This is, as we both know, this is a full-time job, especially if you're in a financial crisis. So for someone to step up and say, I'm going to do this for free, it's tough. It's tough to find that unicorn that can do that, or that group of them.
Exactly.
So what happened in this case?
Yeah. So in this case, the courts said, go ahead and hold an AGM. I'm requiring this condominium corporation to hold an annual general meeting to get a proper board elected to try to right the ship. So they did that. And that was sort of the point in time where my management firm was hired. And I'll tell you, this is not a mess that I was able to untangle on my own. This took about 6 of the smartest minds at our company to meet once a week to go through everything.
So this was like you're sitting around whiteboarding your solutions. Here's our options. Here's what we do next. Make your calls. It's really, all hands on deck.
Exactly. Action
That's insane.
Records of everything. One of the very first things we did as a company is recommend to the new board of directors that they implement an over 70% increase to the condo fees.
How did that go?
It did not go well. I'm sure you
Shocking.
can. Yeah, shocking. This is probably one of the most interesting conflicts that ever happened in my career because the owners actually protested us. We had a picket line.
Oh, wow. Oh, like you had a physical picket line.
Physical picket line.
How many units was this building? Like, was this a big?
Yeah, it was your standard size high rise. Okay. It was a while ago, somewhere around 200 or 250
wow,
units.
So you really had like the community riled up and okay.
Yeah.
And so did you get it passed, or was it put down and the problems continued?
No, we managed to keep the increase as it was, or the board of directors managed to implement the increase despite the politics. It was what needed to be done. And the rest of the ownership of the corporation was not as organized as the board that had been put in place. And they were not successful in any attempts to requisition a meeting to oust the board. The board was able to get it implemented.
Oh, good for them. That's challenging.
It's challenging, but despite the fact that they were able to get that put in place, the long-term damage to the community itself was done. Sometimes, financial problems They're pretty easy to figure out, actually. You see what the state is, you figure out the number that it's going to take to right the ship to get them in a good financial position. But just because you bring the money in doesn't mean the community's been made whole.
Well, but that's true of anything. And again, as a manager, former manager, that's the case. It's with physical problems, financial problems, legal. The problems themselves aren't always that hard to solve. It's the people surrounding the problems. It's the politics that goes into it that's challenging. So that one sounds like just straight fraud, to be honest, like fraud by the old manager or the old owner or whatever he was. And we also talked about ignoring problems, buildings just leave them. Another one I've seen, and maybe you can comment on this, is just when a building just not through fraud, not through neglect, but just spends their money unwisely. And this happens. I see this sometimes, not often, but I do see it sometimes where they're either overpaying on jobs. So, I got a leak in the roof and I'm going to go to an engineer and ask for a new roof rather than let's patch this leak and the rest of the roof is only 5 years old or 10 years old and we'll get more life out of it. And it doesn't have to be a roof, it could be anything, but just poor direction on spending money and then spending on stupid items. We're going to do a corridor renovation for $2 million, even though our windows and our garage are falling apart. And reserve fund study doesn't say we should spend on the corridors. It just says how much we contribute. So we're going to go ahead and do it. And I've seen a few buildings in that position. I've taken over a few like that where the reserve fund is depleted, and you can't point to fraud. You can't point to them necessarily neglecting other things. It's just they haven't spent money wisely or they've spent too much money on certain items. I'm wondering if you've seen much of that in your career or any of it.
Yeah, of course I have. The thing is, some of that is subjective, like it's a matter of opinion. Because of course, aesthetics in a condominium corporation in the building, they are pretty important to ongoing property values. Um, when you have potential buyers walking your building, they don't go in the boiler room. They're not looking at the structural elements of the parking garage. And so boards kind of become myopic. It's small minds, right? I park my car here, I walk into the corridor. I want the corridor to look pretty because that's what's important to me.
100%. And there is value in that. Is there value in that when other projects aren't being done or when you're depleting your reserve fund, with a reserve fund study that says, hey, my chiller has got 3 years left on it. My boilers are coming up to the end of their life. My roof is going to need it. And again, part of it isn't even spending on the wrong thing. It's just spending too much on what you're doing. It's over engineering or going beyond the necessary scope of work.
Yeah, I would say, from my perspective, prioritization is the issue there. What I see really, really frequently is that condominium corporations will come to me saying, hey, Lyndsey, we need this money because our windows are busted. Our windows have to be replaced. And then you look at their reserve fund study, and their reserve fund study has no reflection of that reality. The
Right.
windows are not planned for 20
They've
or
just
30
decided
years.
they got a few complaints and they decided this is now a priority. Right.
Yeah.
Like
So,
I have an example kind of like that. And it's a building I took over and they had some leaks in the roof. And this went sideways in so many ways. And it mostly happened before we started, but it carried on even after we started. So when we got in there, they had gone to tender, they had picked a bidder already. And they were doing the whole roof. And they had this beautiful rooftop terrace. They had gardens, they had barbecues, the whole thing. And they're like, oh, we're taking all of it out, we're redoing it. And we said, well, how come? Well, we've had a few leaks along the parapet wall. I said, okay. Did you try fixing that area? Yeah, we tried, but nothing happened. So we're redoing the whole roof. Well, it's a giant roof. It's a huge area, and 90% of that is not leaking. So yeah, you tried, but like, who did you try with? What did you do? So they ended up doing the whole thing. They took out the rooftop gardens. Now you have two projects. You have a roof project, but then you have a second project that has to follow it to build a new rooftop garden. And none of this was in the reserve fund study. This all came out of what might have been $100,000 portion of the roof that needed patching, and instead it became well over $2 million. And I do see that sometimes where you just one little thing sort of snowballs into a bigger and bigger problem, and it's scope creep, but it's just a lot of it. And again, it depleted the reserve. It went to special assessment, and that's where it ended. But I do see that often enough, unfortunately. And I guess again, you see more of, I think, certain other items, but
Yeah,
lots of ways to get to the same problem.
I think you have to, when you are going through the reserve fund planning process, like you have to give yourself a reality check. Um, if your goal is strictly to address the leak at a minimal cost, when you go into the planning process, you need to make that clear to your consultants. If you going into the next 3 years of projects, and I say 3 years because although a reserve fund study looks at 30 years of projects, it's really a 3 year plan that contemplates 30 years of potential
Absolutely.
projects, right? So when you're going into that process, you should have a pretty clear indication in your mind of what projects you actually want to get advanced over the next 3 years. And then you can make sure to plan the money for it. What I think a lot of managers unfortunately fail to do is to provide that leadership going into the reserve fund study. So, as your 3 years with your reserve fund study kind of is expiring and you go out to start the update process, the manager really needs to be sitting down with the board to say, like, okay, planning time. Let's take a walk around the building. Let's talk about the things that you want to do. Let's look at our financial statements. Where are we bleeding money? And you can strategize your capital repair projects surrounding the reality of your situation and what you want to get accomplished. And if you do that, you're in a much better position to have a realistic financial plan for how to pay for it.
Right. I mean, Lyndsey, that really sounds smart, but it's hard to take you seriously because I hear your dog snoring. So I'm just saying, like, I don't know if you guys can hear that listening to this, but like it's very serious. For those of you, you're not watching the visual part of this, but Lindsay's really like getting into this, and then there's just this like dog snore sound in the background, and I'm like, okay, I'm
He's
trying. I'm
a
really, really trying to take this seriously. No,
he's a
I'm just
really
kidding. That's
tired
that's
guy,
really good
and I know
advice.
not everyone's as excited about finance as I am.
No, it's great advice, and I think a lot of management companies, a lot of boards just treat the reserve fund study as a required document that you need to do every 3 years, and it tells you how much to contribute, and we'll try to follow it. But if things break, we're going to fix those things instead. And I think to your point, really, it's an opportunity. It's a missed opportunity in a lot of cases for management and board members to create that roadmap that they need to get where they want to go, to really decide what do we want to do, what do we want this building to look like, how do we want to go about the repairs we need to do. And I think that's a missed opportunity. It's not done very often, but it's good advice. It's very good advice because it's something that really should be. It's something we need to be doing. um, I'll flip the conversation a little bit. So you mentioned developers setting reserve fund studies, or sorry, setting the reserve fund contributions really low, and that's something we know happens. They want to keep the fees low so they can sell the units for more. um, but tell me, I think you had a story. I have one definitely, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But sometimes the developers themselves create problems, and Terrion, the warranty company, doesn't always catch all of this. I've got a horrific example. I'm living right now in a building I took over, but I think you had an example you wanted to touch on in this as well.
Yeah, and it's not always just that the Tarion process doesn't catch the issues. It's that sometimes the Tarion process takes too long and the issues are serious enough that you can't wait until that process resolves
No, bills
itself.
bills need to be paid, and absolutely, yeah.
Exactly. So I have a condominium corporation that I'm working with right now, that's really struggling with the original installation of their windows. And this is from original construction, original design. What it is this corporation has like very large windows. It's not really a curtain wall system, it's just really large windows. And the structural support system is improperly designed such that the windows are not supported properly. Like the weight of the glass is really, really heavy.
Right, and it just wasn't figured out by the
Yeah. And
builders.
so on the short term, they're having just issues with windows failing, little cracks, problems with the seal, fogging in behind the brand new windows, those types of things. But when the engineers dig into the problem deeper, they realize that this structural support issue, it creates, a safety problem, not day to day. But if there was, say, like an earthquake or a major, major windstorm, potentially these windows could just fall out because they're
Oh
not
wow.
sufficiently support it. Here's the
Ouch.
challenge. The cost to fix the problem is $8 million
Oh my God.
or about $130,000 per unit.
Hmm.
So what do you do when you have litigation ongoing? Your warranty process is not able to support you fast enough. You need to get in behind the windows anyway to support the litigation process because you need evidence that there's actually a problem.
Hmm.
And you have all these owners of basically brand new condominium units footing the bill.
And paying whatever for the condo plus another 130,000 that they didn't see coming, adding it to their mortgage. And yeah, and as I mentioned, I've got a very similar case. And it's a small building, and they're past the Terry-on period. And what they didn't realize is it's a stacked town rooftop terraces. What they didn't realize is that slowly water had been seeping in through some faults in the roof, and it had been rotting away at the structure underneath. And the way this place was built made it very difficult for them to know the extent of the damage or what was happening. It just presented itself as leaks inside the units, which multiple engineers have looked at. And again, without tearing the whole thing apart, it was hard to see. Now they've taken it apart and they're looking at multi-phase project. First phase of over 70,000 for some of the bigger units and a bit less for the smaller ones. Phase two might be well in excess of 100,000. So you might be over 200,000 when all is said and done per unit on condos that now with the market's down as we're doing this podcast. That's a substantial portion of the actual cost of the condo, and none of these people anticipated that they would need this. So there's litigation. They've gone to Terry-on. They've done everything they can do, but they're just in this nasty situation where it's a mix of loan, special assessment, all of this through no fault of their own, really, no fault whatsoever. And that's just unfortunate. It was um, a bad design by the developer essentially that just caught up with them, but after the Terry-on process, after that warranty period, because it was slow to manifest.
Yeah. Remember I said earlier, the financial part is usually the easier part to figure out, right? Like, the dollar value of the project is, you can do it.
Yeah,
And
a single spreadsheet can figure out what we need. That's not the hard part. The
yeah,
hard part is how do you deal with that? How do you deal with owners that buy a place with the money they have, take on a loan that's probably bigger than they want, for their mortgage, and then tell them, hey, you need to up this by 100 grand, 200 grand, even 50,000 in some cases. It's still a lot of money.
yeah,
I've gotten slack in buildings where we've had to do special assessments for $200, period,
me
and they're
too.
freaking out. So
Me too. There's a bigger challenge too, because special assessments on paper are pretty easy, right? Board of directors is empowered to just levy it. Owners have to pay
sure,
it like a condo fee, and they don't have
no
to like
sweat,
it,
no sweat,
but it's
easy.
okay, right? When you have a litigation or a potential that there's going to be recovery of costs for what you're paying out, it's even harder to think about putting a special assessment on these owners because the way that the act is designed or the requirements of the Condo Act, there's a specific restriction against returning money to the owners.
That's right.
The
Yeah.
owners pay the special assessment, and then if the condo corporation is successful in recovery, I'll use my example, they're going to be sitting on $8 million that they are not allowed to give back to the
Yeah,
owners
you can't get
unless the
that back.
condominium
That's
corporation
that's
is
right.
terminated, you know?
Yep.
And even if they could, these litigations can take years. What if an owner sells in the meantime? The new
Hmm.
owner then would receive the benefit of all that money that the previous owner paid out.
Yeah, and you would think it'd be factored into the cost of the unit, but it's not that simple at all. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
these things get very, very complicated when you get into the weeds of what you can and can't do. Um, but those ones are really unfortunate because it's bad luck. You would never know when you're buying a condo that this could happen until it happens, and then you're just stuck. And I
Yeah.
have another one. It's thankfully it didn't lead to the developer stepped up and they're doing repairs beyond what they were required to do. But balcony railings coming off in a high rise. It was just bad build. Thankfully, again, the developer was true to their word. They're fixing all the problems. We don't need to pay extra for, but that one very easily could have gone sour, and that would have been easily 50,000 per unit.
Yeah, well, it's good to
easily.
know there's some good developers out there. I think, if there are some trusted brand names out in the market that are interested in, maintaining their reputation.
I
Uh,
won't lie, it took 2 years of fighting, but they're doing it.
yeah, yeah.
They are doing it. I'll give them that. So
Yeah, this is one scenario where loans can be really helpful, right? You can amortize the cost over a really long period of time, but lock in for a very short term. And so that way, at least, once litigation is done or the warranty process is done, if there is money coming back, the corporation can use that money to repay the loan and condo fees can go
absolutely.
down and things can resettle at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're not stuck sitting on a massive amount of money that you can't use.
Yeah.
So we're just about the end of our half hour. My last question to you is what tips do you have for managers, even board members, to avoid getting themselves into financial disasters?
Yeah, so I have a few.
Go
And
for
I
it.
thought maybe it would be good to talk about some tips, like from a few different lenses, right? Owners, board members, managers. So if you're an owner of a condominium unit, you're listening to this podcast, the important piece of advice that I can give you is to pay attention to what's happening. Because in reality, these big financial problems can almost seem to pop out of nowhere. It's really easy to do damage fast if you are mismanaging funds or committing fraud and things like that. So, show up at your annual general meeting, read the financial statements. It's not the sexiest thing, but it is important that you read the disclosure and you know what's going on so that you have
Read
the
the
best
notes. Read the
opportunity to
notes at
protect
the
your
end.
investment.
Those are the key.
Yeah, the notes especially are important. For boards of directors, I think um, the best advice that I could give is to say that patch repairs and deferral of projects are usually not the best solution. They're usually not the most economical, and they usually actually serve to increase the condo fees by more over time. So just because a problem is hard, doesn't mean that you should avoid doing it and just kick the can down the road for future board members to try to figure out what to do. Only gets more expensive and it only gets harder if you don't face the facts of what's happening.
Well, you get into a tax and spend kind of thing. If you've got, let's say, balconies that are having problems with the concrete, yeah, every year you could pay to patch and do small repairs and things like that, and you're going to be paying for it. If you actually bite the bullet and do the project, chip the concrete away, fix the rebar, you're not paying for that for years after that. So it's sort of switching from an operation side cost where every year you're putting in X number of dollars from your reserve versus do it one shot, fix it correctly, and then not have to worry about it for a long time after.
Yeah.
And obviously the second approach is the better approach if you can reasonably do it.
Exactly. And then if you're a condo manager, the best advice that I can give is to not be afraid to provide some leadership to the board. Help them understand the project management process. Get information from them about what it is that they want to accomplish as board members for their own community and use those conversations to help them plan their capital repairs more effectively. I have just one more tip, kind of as a general process, but sometimes you have to look past your immediate problem and look at things holistically. What do we want to do? All of it, right? To your first example, Eric, right? Like, I want to do my corridors. Okay, but what else do we need to do? What is the bigger picture and how do we accomplish all of it?
That's that roadmap. You really got to sit down, and that's the reserve fund study is your opportunity for that. But that's your roadmap to just say, here's where we are, here's what we need to do, and here's how we get there. Here's the funding plan to do it and stick to it, minus emergencies that come up. But absolutely,
Mhm.
um, Lyndsey, thank you so much for coming on. It was great chatting with you, and well, just thank you,
Yeah, it's my
and to your
pleasure.
dog.
Yeah, it's my pleasure anytime. I'm happy to be here. I look forward to hearing more episodes of the podcast when it's eventually named. And thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, next time we'll wake up the dog.
Okay.
All right, take care.
Okay, have a good one.